Today we're going to talk about some patterns of inheritance that's different than what we've talked about before. So to date, we've talked about complete dominance. We've got a dominant allele, we've got a recessive one, and because this one's dominant, this one's going to completely take over, and that's what we see in the heterozygous. So if we happen to have brown eyes and blue eyes, since brown eyes is dominant, brown eyes dominates, and that's what we see in an individual. Obviously, that's not the case for everything. In this flower, we see both white and pink coloring. So there must be some other types of inheritance that exist to allow these kind of patterns to come up. That's what we'll talk about today. Take a moment, read over the learning goals and write them down so you know what to focus on for this lesson. One form of inheritance is something called incomplete dominance. So since neither the red nor the white are able to completely dominate, like a tug of war, we actually end up with this third phenotype, which is a blend of the two. So red couldn't take over, white couldn't take over, so it's like they settled on this third option, so both of them get something out of it. Keep in mind, we're looking at the heterozygous. So the heterozygous is the one that's going to be different in this case from our complete dominance. Since neither of them completely take over, that third phenotype is always going to be a sign that something shows incomplete dominance, because there's no other way in which we're going to actually have three different phenotypes from two alleles show up. So if we're looking at that red plant, the red plant's going to have both red alleles, the white plant's going to have both white alleles, and that combination or that hybrid, the heterozygous, is going to have a white and a pink allele, and that will make it pink. Looking over this little cross, we've got that red represented, two red alleles, white, two white alleles, crossing together, making pink flowers. And in that second generation, when we have those two homozygous pop up again, we'll have that red and that white pop up again in that population. I want you to pay attention because there's a little bit of a difference when it comes to how we do notation in incomplete and codominance. This is one way you can do it, in which you're going to have two capital letters. Notice that they're both R, because we're still talking about the same trait. So since we're talking about the color of the flower, we need to make sure the letter's the same so that we're talking about that one trait. However, we have different alleles that are attached to that. And so we might happen to indicate R for flower color and put a 1 next to it to show that we're talking about the red flower color, or a R and then a 2 next to it to show that we're talking about the white flower color. But we have both of these be capital because none of them completely dominates over the other one. The other type of inheritance that we see, that's like that flower on the first slide, is something called codominance. So neither of them are able to win, and they don't really care about winning. They cooperate, and so both alleles are going to be expressed. In this, we might start out with a cattle with red hair and a cattle with white hair. And when they come together, all of our heterozygous population is going to be white hair and red hair allele. These are going to actually be something known as rowan, which is that patchy color of red and white. Looks like something like this guy. This is another way that we can actually indicate the difference between alleles. Here, we still have one letter that's going to be representing the trait that we're talking about. So we're talking about the hair color in cattle, so we're going to pick C. However, instead of just doing a 1 or 2, we might choose to use a letter that's related to what that allele means in order to determine that that's the allele for white-colored hair, or that this is the allele for red-colored hair. So you could use either numbers or letters. It doesn't really make a difference. But I'm going to encourage you, make sure you have that capital there, because that capital is indicating that they both are dominant. You don't have one dominant over the other one. Something happens really interestingly when it comes to things like codominance. And sometimes we have an advantage to being heterozygous. In this situation, we have either normal blood cells or sickle blood cells. If you happen to have normal blood cells, like the ones that are on the left here, then your blood can carry oxygen normally. However, you're more likely to get a disease called malaria. And that's caused from a mosquito that'll land on you, and when it bites you, it actually gets a little bit of an organism into your blood. So you could die from malaria. On the other hand, you could have 2 sickle cell genes. And if you've got 2 sickle cell alleles, you're going to have sickle cell, which could also end up killing you. The best combination is actually being heterozygous. Being heterozygous allows you to resist getting the disease. Another special type of codominance is something known as blood types. And so these are the things that determine whether or not we're going to have blood type A, blood type B, blood type O, type AB, any of those. And these show a combination of different types of inheritance. So we actually have 3 alleles. So this is a multiple allele type of inheritance. We have this one, capital I with an A, here capital I with a B, and here a lowercase I. And this lowercase I, just like all lowercase means, represents the recessive allele for blood. This is what's known as the O allele. Just like when we talked about with codominance, we have capital I's for both the A allele and the B allele because they're codominant. So when we're looking at blood types, if you happen to have an A and a B, your blood type's AB. However, if you happen to have an A allele with one of those recessive ones, well, the A allele takes over, and so you have type A blood. The only time to be able to get type O blood is if you have both recessive alleles. So take a look over these key questions and see how well you understood the lesson for today. And we'll talk some more tomorrow.